And we welcome you to Studio 255 in the Laramie Plains Civic Center, our edition this morning with Dr. Kevin Kilty. Dr. Kilty, what have you brought to us today?
Well, what have I brought? A number of interesting things. You know, you and I have talked about some discussions about utility bills at some time, and we've never really gotten around there. But we might do a little of that today. But there were a couple of very interesting presentations at the Public Service Commission in the last couple of weeks involved in...
Did you attend those directly or remotely?
No, I attended them directly.
Okay.
I like to get away from Laramie and go over and sit at the Public Service Commission hearing room live.
Because you're retired?
Because I'm retired and I've got the time to do it. But, you know, it's you learn a lot live that you miss when you're watching things remotely
or recorded.
Sure. And at any rate, both of them involved essentially the same topic, which is Wyoming utilities joining larger entities that are regional integrated systems operators, and the reasons for doing so. And one of them was the Southwest Power Pool, which is a really old integrated systems operator. I didn't realize this. They began operation in 1941, and they began operation because of World War II. There was inadequate electrical supply in the country for many industrial operations, and they gathered numerous utilities together around, eastern Kansas, Arkansas, Missouri, and so forth, in order to provide industrial plants reliable, capable, adequate energy. And they've grown since then. The Southwest Power Pool involves what an integrated systems operator does, and they're a balancing authority area, is they balance your power all day long. They try to tell somebody who's a generator that we need more power, and they do this on a sort of a 5-minute basis all throughout the day. And they balance power from North Dakota all the way into North Texas and eastern New Mexico.
Do they have a facility that collects and then redistributes power to do that, or how does that function happen exactly?
It's really pretty fascinating because they have interties to other areas. They have data that flows in from the various power producers. I'm trying to remember. They probably have 600 or 700 power producers in that area. Some of them are hydroelectric. The dams on the Missouri River are an example. They have coal-fired power plants. Basin and Tri-State supply coal-fired power in there, but there were lots of others too. Natural gas. One of their really big suppliers, though, is wind, when it's available. Mm-hmm. And so they try to balance all of this out, 5-minute intervals all day long. Well, they are proposing to put together something that is a day-ahead market, so that they can have people bid on providing power one day ahead, and then they can plan and provide the least expensive power to their consumers and maintain reserves in case things go wrong.
Do the United States have that infrastructure available to make that possible?
You know, there are a fair number of these independent systems operators, and there is the New England Independent System Operator, New York State, but then the really big one in the United States is PJM, and PJM is really Pennsylvania, Jersey, and Maryland. They have 62 million customers in their ISO. And then next over is MISO, the Mid-Continent Integrated System Operator, and they handle things from Iowa into Ohio and so forth, and then south, of course, north-south. And then there's the Southwest Power Pool. And out here in the West, we're kind of sort of anarchists out here. We don't have something like that exactly. The big one out here in the West is the California Independent System Operator. And they have a very large number of customers. And the interesting thing is Pacific Corp, Rocky Mountain Power specifically, really wants to join the California Independent System Operator in what is known as the EDAM, the Extended Day Ahead Market, that they're planning to implement. So getting back to the the hearing at the Public Service Commission.
Is that in Cheyenne?
Yes, it was. And the Southwest Power Pool talked about their system structure, who belongs to it, who is joining it in the near future here. They're going to have a number of other entities join it in April of this year. And I think they were making a bit of a pitch that maybe Wyoming should think about becoming part of them. Their governance is different than the California ISO. And I'll just mention, within Wyoming, we have some utilities that are tri-state customers. Tri-state generation provides the power, uses lines that are owned by Rocky Mountain Power to deliver that power to various utilities in Wyoming. And a lot of generating facilities are part of what people call WACM. It's the Western Area Power Administration, Colorado-Missouri branch. And for example, the Roundhouse wind farm that you see between Cheyenne and Laramie, they generate and supply power to WACM. And the WACM assets are joining the Southwest Power Pool. So I was pretty impressed by their testimony, and their governance is extremely democratic. Everybody gets a voice. Everybody who has any amount of transmission line, and I think their minimum is you have to have 15 miles of transmission line.
Who owns the transmission line? Do the power companies maintain ownership, or does ownership go to the state, or how are those lines?
Rocky Mountain Power owns an enormous number of transmission lines in the West.
Okay.
And so that's privately owned.
And are those lines involved with paying severance tax for the state with respect to vision hindrance or things like that? Nowadays, you think about extraction and minerals being extracted.
Yeah.
Well, one resource that was discussed in the earlier February meeting in Cheyenne with the State Land Board was Governor Gordon mentioned Cale Case years ago suggested a severance tax to wind power setups where the vision is severed, the site resource is severed in the state of Wyoming. Interesting. What are your thoughts on that?
That's interesting because I don't know if people here in Laramie are beginning to notice, but we've got some really big wind turbines out to the northwest here. And if you travel Old Highway 30, which is, I think, part of the Sand Creek Massacre Trail, right? It's a named alternate trail of moving across the state of Wyoming. And you would think that those are scenic and are fun for tourists to travel on the ground and so forth. The wind turbines are getting to the point where they obscure the view. And I have mentioned this, I don't know how many times. The Industrial Siting Council never listens to me. And they are annoying in another way.
Who comprises that council?
Well, they are nominated by the governor, of course, and it changes quite a bit. And I couldn't tell you all of the people that are on it at the present time.
Yeah.
But I don't think they've ever turned down an application for anything. But there is plenty of evidence on that travelers, when they're traveling on the ground and choosing a route, choose a route where they think they will see the most natural scenery. That's what they value most highly. And if you're going to put up 700-foot tall wind turbines, 2 to the square mile, across their journey, they'll probably choose another route. And as you know, tourism is pretty big business in Wyoming.
Number 2 in the state of Wyoming said.
Yeah. And so I think you can damage your tourism industry by getting people to take alternate routes because they get tired of looking at wind turbines.
Well, I mentioned the February meeting of the State Land Board. It was a 3-2 vote actually in favor of ceasing the permits to 2 wind permittees in Wyoming, and one Prairie and one Sidewinder. I believe that I don't have the full name correctly, but 2.
One of them was Pronghorn, I think.
Pronghorn. There you go. Pronghorn.
Yeah.
Prairie wrong. Pronghorn, correct. And thank you for that. The room was pretty stunned. There were claps and cheers, and it was not a quiet celebration of the 3-2 vote, which showed substantial trending change from the April 2025 determination, which permitted others
Yeah.
to come alive and be born.
Yeah. Well, at any rate, it's interesting then to be able to make the case, as Cale did, that is a resource that's being taken away from Wyoming people, and maybe there should be a severance tax. You may know that at the present time, there's simply a wind energy tax in the state of Wyoming, and it's $1 per megawatt hour, and it generates almost nothing. If it generates $8 million to the entire state in a year, and that's shared 40-60 between the county in which the project is located and the state. And as you know, government can spend $8 million in a blink of an eye, and you wonder how it was done. But government is expensive. It's providing a lot of services and employs a fair number of people, and it buys supplies and so forth and so on. So trying to make up with a wind tax what you're going to lose in severance taxes as you shut down mines and so forth, that's a losing proposition. It's never gonna work. And I try to point this out to people, and we could carry this off in another direction, talking about power bills and whatnot. But getting back to the Southwest Power Pool once more.
Did they provide an incentive to the state of Wyoming beyond the power of the influence of their group in the country in terms of service power?
You know, here's the arguments for both of them, the California EDAM and the Southwest Power Pool, is that by joining a larger market, they can make more efficient use of resources, which will save you money. So you'll get supposedly, saving money is always a mysterious thing, as you know. It doesn't actually lower cost. That's what you would like them to promise, lower cost. Saving you money is nebulous. Yeah, they can always say, well, your bills are lower now than they would have been had we not done this. And that's a pretty weak argument, very unsatisfying. But that's the promise of the Southwest Power Pool, is that they'll be able to dispatch resources more efficiently, which will save money. But they say it will also provide for more reliable power. Now, here in Laramie, we've had really reliable power for as long as I've lived here, which is going on 13 years now. And I don't have complaints about reliability. We had one outage that I remember that ran about 10 hours one time. And we had one scheduled outage, if you remember, a couple years ago that ran about 8 and blew up my oven when the power came back on. I was told by Rocky Mountain Power that they could get some ugly transients once in a while, turning the power back on. It was an old oven, and they actually did me a favor. I got a much better oven on my own, and they didn't pay for any of it. But, you know, that's neither here nor there. I've been happy with Rocky Mountain Power, but I find them to be kind of slippery and evasive now, and I hope that we can hold a line on power bills. But California ISO, getting over to them, they promise the same thing. So I've got real specific numbers there. The California ISO, their fact sheet for the EDAM says we will save, when everybody who's currently a member of our Western Energy Imbalance Market, which is a 5-minute and 15-minute market in the West, when all of those people join, we're going to save all the customers $1.2 billion a year. That sounds like a lot of money to you and I, doesn't it? But there are 72 million people involved in all of that, which means there are probably in the neighborhood of 24 million accounts. And if you look at it that way, every year, that's like $50. They're going to save you $50 a year per account. Now, I know how much power I use. And if I were to save $50 a year on power, that would be 0.6 of a penny per kilowatt hour. In other words, when you bring it down to the individual account holder, it's really small. It's a very modest savings. And their other big promise is they will save 2.9 million tons of CO2 a year. Well, that sounds like an awful lot of CO2. China releases that much CO2 in 113 minutes. And so, once again, that's a really tiny benefit, even if I don't view that as a benefit at all, but people who are CO2 obsessed might see that as a benefit, but it's really little. It doesn't amount to anything. And they are talking about once everybody who's a member of the Western Energy Imbalance Market joins EDAM, well, the only two entities that are going to be involved in EDAM are the California Independent System Operator and Rocky Mountain Power when it starts in April. We are tiny in comparison to the California Independent System Operator. The advantage that they see to Rocky Mountain Power is Rocky Mountain Power has an enormous number of transmission lines. It reaches very, very distant locations across the West. What's the advantage to the California Independent System Operator? They've got curtailed solar power to no end down in the Southwest, and this may provide them a market to have that travel clear up here into Wyoming. But as you know, if very cheap solar power arrives up here during the midday, it only lasts for maybe 6 hours of the day. It will cause other things to be curtailed because they're, quote, more expensive, unquote.
And then they'll be unavailable for us when we truly need them.
That's the concern, isn't it? Where's the reserve? How much is there? And if you continue to have multiple generating sources competing with one another, which they think this competition is good, I don't view it as good, and I will tell you why. The analogy I have come up with is you have a gasoline automobile that provides your transportation needs. Now suddenly you decide, I want to save some CO2 emissions, and I don't want to buy gasoline, so I'm going to buy an electric vehicle. Now I have two vehicles, and one, you're saving money on fuel, right, because the electricity is a little less expensive per mile driven than the other car. But your transportation needs, which are pretty fixed, are now being served by two vehicles, both of which you have to license and insure and maintain, and nobody can make the argument that that's providing you less expensive transportation. The same thing is true here. I've got wind turbines, coal, gas, solar. Many of them won't work at the same time because they either provide too much power and have to be curtailed, or they provide no power at all and have to be backed up. And you got all these multiple sources serving your power needs, and it makes it more expensive. And boy, if you think I have trouble explaining anything to anyone, it's really hard to explain that one to people. But I think the two-car analogy is not bad. And if you look in Wyoming here, one way to determine how much utility you're getting from a generating resource is to look at its capacity factor. How much power does it actually produce and deliver compared to how much it could theoretically if it were really running all the time? Wyoming's total system capacity factor has declined continuously in the last 15 years. As you've added more wind and solar to the grid in this area, they have to back the coal and gas plants back. The two, you're now sharing a fixed amount of demand and so forth among various entities, and our capacity factor has dropped from about 70% to 43%, which means we're getting less utility out of our invested capital dollars in the power system. And California's, the CAISO has a terrible capacity factor. It's about 25%. And you could say, well, gosh, that's kind of sounds like they've got 4 different entities that are supplying power, and they're sharing all of them.
That's a much higher, to 47%. That's a much more substantial change than I would have anticipated. That
You're talking about the Wyoming.
Yeah, the Wyoming reduction. That's substantial. If I were in business considering Wyoming as my business,
Mm-hmm.
It's bad business to support anything but our natural resources until the numbers change in a different fashion. I mean, just the fact that you say that we're looking at $8 million perhaps in revenue from wind turbine revenue, and that's in total. And then you compare that, we're probably doing that, I would say, much 10x in coal.
Or I think it's even
In
beyond
a year.
10x.
And that's minimum.
Yeah.
That's not accurate. That's understated.
Yeah, it's a problem, and it's been known for a long time that as you get involved in more diverse power systems, you end up with a lower capacity factor for everyone. So let's just focus on solar energy coming from the southwest during the day. It's curtailed at the present time, and the generators get nothing. As you know, in the Inflation Reduction Act, there were a lot of sweeteners for wind and solar energy in there. And if you meet all of their requirements, you can earn about 3.6 cents per kilowatt hour with just tax expenditures, just subsidies directly to your operation. If it sets idle, they can't earn that 3.6 cents on each kilowatt hour that they generate. They would be willing, I'm sure, to sell at negative 1 penny per kilowatt hour, because they would then make it up on the 3.6 cents of subsidy, and they'd be turning a profit. Now, you've got to figure dispatch would look at negative price. They'll pay us to take it. How can you beat that? But something maybe has to be curtailed, and it might even be Wyoming wind. And so it's quite possible that having that subsidized power flow up here into the middle of the day will actually curtail coal and gas back to as low a level as is possible, but maybe also curtail some wind. And so it could hurt Wyoming revenues. There's a lot to consider in this. And I don't know the algorithm, the optimization algorithm. And I'm suspicious of anything California. I have to feel like the rules will be weighted a little in California's favor, no matter what they claim.
Well, it very much feels like the interests of bigger states are controlling the future of our Wyoming. It's absolutely obvious that with the Colorado River Compact coming to an expiration in 2026 June, that alone indicates states like Texas, Arizona, Nevada, and California are frankly leading a charge that very well could leave us all in the Supreme Court. Colorado and Wyoming's interests more closely aligned in this particular case than any other. But say Wyoming wanted to have a hydropower facility. Our water has been flowing through the headwaters hundreds of years, and yet we would have our destiny, our future, curtailed potentially by the decisions of these larger states, larger populations, for our undeveloped Wyoming.
You probably are aware of a lawsuit that Wyoming lost a number of years ago. And actually, Harriet Hageman was one of the attorneys involved in this. But we lost a lawsuit with Nebraska. Some of our water rights in eastern Wyoming are not really ours.
Chiseled away.
Yeah, it was chiseled away because, well, the argument is that they're more productive if they're in Nebraska because as irrigation, crop yields are higher. And it's hard to argue with that. But that's an example. Wyoming is high country. It's kind of dry. It's cold in the winter. It's windy, and so forth.
And let's face it, we just don't have the numbers to even compete with Nebraska,
right?
To our our east, and that alone, it's very much a numbers money game. Follow the influence. You can usually follow it in that fashion. Each spring, citizens, property owners receive an opportunity to select a carrier for service, provide electricity and power in their homes throughout the community. Wyoming Choice Gas, and I guess it's gas, not electricity, but
it's gas.
What process do you go through, Dr. Kilty, when it comes to when you look at the choices? Be it a handful of choices each spring. Is it negligible change between one and another, for your finding, or have you looked closely at it?
You know what? At times I'm too rational for my own good. And just what I'll share with you is that I look at the various choices, and they tell me what they're willing to provide per therm. And a therm is another one of those weird units that nobody understands. But that's a therm is a British thermal unit sort of measure, and you can think of it as 10 therms is about a million BTUs of heat for your home. And I go through and I see what they're willing to offer per therm, and I take the lowest one, and I sign up for 2 years. And so what happened last time? As you know, if you don't choose anybody, you got a default choice through Black Hills, right? Well, I thought I'd done fine. I was way below the default choice with Black Hills. But what happened in the meantime was that somebody dropped their rates for natural gas a lot, and now I was stuck with higher gas price than the default option through Black Hills. So it's very difficult. This is another interesting, but this ties into electric generation too. The natural gas market has volatile prices. If you look at the price to electric power generators in Utah, so Rocky Mountain Power, most of their gas generation is in Utah. So you look at the price of natural gas delivered to those plants in Utah, and in December of 2022, it went to $40 a million BTUs. The usual price is in the neighborhood of $4, and it went up 10 times. Why? Well, it was the Russian-Ukrainian fiasco that did that to us. That is real volatility, and even over the course of a year, you may get like 100% rise in gas prices when demand is high in the winter. So that volatility is going to travel into your electric utility bills. As you know, we've had 3 rate cases in Wyoming in the past, well, with Rocky Mountain Power at least in the last couple of years, and one of them was specifically tied to that terrible spike in gas prices in 22, and it led to about a 6% raise in your utility bill so that they could claw that back. It was unbudgeted money. No one expected that sort of thing. So depending on gas to make your electric power has a volatility risk to it. You look at Powder River Basin coal, and it is a flat about 85 cents per million BTUs, and has been flat like that for a very long time. I don't even know how far back, maybe 20 years.
Predictable.
It's very predictable. And if you were an executive in a power company, why wouldn't you have some coal in your inventory of generators just so that you had costs that you could count on that weren't so volatile? At any rate, I've now kind of lost the track of where we were talking about the EDAM and so forth. Man, you as you know, always have curiosities when you're visiting, Dr. Kilty. You take us back where you wanted us to go. Well, one of the things I was going to say is you probably know that we had a person in Wyoming who was on that Colorado River Commission, part of the original compact, and that was H.T. Person, who was the Dean of Engineering here in Laramie. And he was part of the group that divvied it up, but they divvied it up at a time when the river flows were high, and as a result, they over-allocated. Rainfall and everything was higher. We weren't in the lower moisture. Well, if you look at it, moisture in the West is pretty volatile in its own right. We have wet years and dry years, and they just happened to take a period of time which was a little above the typical flow on the Colorado River, and they over-allocated it. And now look at how many people are depending upon it. It's crazy. I don't know what's going to happen in that, but we'll continue to follow it. When you sat in on the commission, what observations did you take from it? Well, I'll tell you one that I found kind of interesting. And this has now happened to me a couple of times. I get over there, I've researched their application and the associated documents pretty carefully. I have some idea of what the rewards and risks are, and I'm prepared to give some oral testimony right then and there. When I get there, I realize I should have kept up with the process a little better than I did, because everybody has agreed to a stipulated settlement. And now I don't know what the settlement really is. I haven't researched it and so forth, so that kind of short-circuits some of the things I was planning to do. But this stipulated settlement is not a bad one. I'm not unhappy about it. What they have proposed to the commission, and the commission will decide this in the next 30 days or so, is they have proposed that we go ahead and join the EDAM for just 5 years, and that we examine the data very carefully year by year to see how it's working out. And I think if they look at it in total, this will work out fine. Maybe some benefits will arrive that outweigh the risks, and we'll be better off. I don't think so. I think what's going to happen is we're going to see increased pressure for rate increases almost immediately, because their optimization algorithm is going to optimize things that are not in our interest to optimize. And the average benefit might be positive, but that just means a small positive benefit in California can outweigh a really negative benefit in Wyoming. So we'll see. I think you'll be able to see if there are going to be problems with curtailed power sold at very low prices, undermining our network. We'll see it pretty quickly.
It seems that Wyoming leadership needs to take a firmer stand with protecting Wyoming interests, just the same as in insurance when it comes to health insurance.
Yeah.
And we have carriers that come in, they come out, they offer something in Wyoming, then they disappear a year later, and we're forced to take whatever we can get. And that seems to be the path of us going away from coal in Wyoming.
Yeah, I don't know. Coal, if you look at the graphs that everybody makes of contributors to power, coal is always black, the black curve. And you know that has a psychological effect, right?
Right.
And natural gas is kind of a weird brown. And solar is sunny yellow. And wind is beautiful green.
Color theory.
Yeah, it's the color theory. You're being propagandized in every manner possible every
Psychologists
day.
create these things, and marketers and teams come together and collaborate to the most influence and persuasion.
Yeah. Now, I can tell you that one other observation I made, and I've never really dealt with these people before, is there was a group involved as interveners in this EDAM decision that are a trade association for renewable energy. And as you might guess, the purpose of a trade association is to promote the people who belong to your trade association. So they're big promoters of renewable energy. And I had the most interesting discussion with a guy who's worked for them for now 15 years. He's a graduate of the University of Wyoming Law School. And boy, he has got a story down. He and the economist that they had as a witness have a story down on renewable energy that I found amusing in a way. Their economist said this EDAM will help us produce a level playing field for generators of electricity. This is coming out of the mouth of a guy whose trade association members get paid as much as a 3.6 kilowatt per hour subsidy. And how is that a level playing field? It's just crazy to talk about this. And you know, these subsidies to the power, they claim that coal and natural gas also get federal subsidies, but it's minuscule in comparison to renewable. And one of the things I've learned by reading some documents from the Texas Public Policy Foundation, I don't know if you know of those people.
I do not.
It turns out that the subsidies provided to low-income people for their power bills is accounted as a subsidy to coal and gas. You know what? It's
wow.
It's remarkable accounting is all you can say, because
spin to win.
Well, that's right, because a lot of these people, their electricity is now coming from wind and solar, and if they're getting those household bills subsidized and it's only being accounted against coal and gas, it sounds a little unfair. It's just more of a an unlevel playing field. And what bothers me about the unlevel playing field is the grid would not actually run at the present time without coal and gas. You could, yeah, there are times when you'll get almost enough energy out of wind, but there are times when there's almost nothing. Another interesting thing that I learned, doing some research to put together a reasonable, I sent a written comment after the hearing last Thursday, but to the commission. But in doing that research, I found a headline that said the Southwest Power Pool in the past week has had 90% of its energy delivered by wind. Well, the week in question was the week of March the 23rd to the 31st of 2022. So I went back and pulled up the EIA data for that week, and I can't find any way in which you can interpret the data that I looked at as coming anywhere near 90%. And, you know, this sort of propaganda just comes out of the trade associations. And I'm not blaming them, but people need to be a little more proactive in saying, the trade association promotes their members, and I should be a little skeptical about what they say. Right? Caution, skepticism. Well, the stipulated settlement has caution in it, and I think that's good.
Yeah, for sure. What subsidies are we benefiting from more than we're frankly just paying too much as Americans in power and energy?
You know, I look at this stuff, and I mean, this has become entertainment in my retirement. And why don't I go fish? But it really is. It is entertaining because
this
is
a fever, Dr. Kilty.
This
you have
is
a fever. We need to heal you.
Get a hypnotist. Spin something shiny in front of my eyes. You know, I look at this stuff a lot, and if you look at power rates across the country, if you look at retail power rates to consumers across the country, there's an enormous range of power. So let's just talk about Wyoming Power. Right now, Rocky Mountain Power, I pay on Schedule 2, which I think is dictated by the fact that I have a 200 amp service at my house or something like that, because there's a Schedule 1 that's a little cheaper. But my Schedule 2 service has only two charges on it now for the commodity itself. One is a per kilowatt hour charge, and that's about 8.2 cents. And the other is a net power cost charge, and I think that's about 3.8 or something like that. So you add the two together, and it's about 11 point some cents per, no, it's 11.85 cents per kilowatt hour is what the combination of the two come up to. That's not bad if you compare power rates across the country. In California, the power rates are like 35 cents a kilowatt hour. It's 3 times what we pay here in Wyoming, and there are places in California where they have a charge that varies by time of day, and some of those people at peak are paying above 50 cents a kilowatt hour. Can you imagine people in Wyoming paying 50 cents a kilowatt hour for power? It would
bankruptcy.
Well, it would be a terrible dislocation to our economy. I don't know how we'd accommodate it.
No such thing as affordable housing.
Yeah, that to make it another valid comparison, right?
When observing the February 3rd State Land Board meeting in Cheyenne, I recognized that just the hint of elimination of these wind leases had brought a row of legal counsel to the meeting. One spoke, multiple others prepared
something
materials, or were there in ready probably for different aspects that potentially the meeting might turn or develop and journey. But only the true land holdings had a representative that was strongly in favor of the pronghorn and leases being considered that day.
Yeah.
There were a couple other speakers perhaps that were neutral to supportive, but in general, I would say it's really four corners of Wyoming are becoming really fearful of wind and what it means to Wyoming's future, and 4,000 permitted turbines from Colorado to Montana across Wyoming already approved for construction. That was framed as a wind wall by one given testimony, and it does bear blink influence and vision obstruction and wildlife impact and just the vibration of these 53-foot turbine tines as they swirl. It's unstudied from many perspectives, and there's wildlife counts, impact counts that are challenged. There's apparently a problem for some entities in their accountability of they can't count the impact. They've been caught not counting correctly. Well, that seems elementary. Mathematics, something we all reading, writing, and arithmetic, quite basic, but fundamentally powerful in the influence ultimately to what profit comes from these endeavors for companies that aren't Wyoming owned. They're quite often foreign owned.
There are some that are foreign owned. And if you look at the benefits that flow from this, the state gets benefit from leases, but a lot of that state land also supports tourism through hunting, guided hunts and so forth and so on. Are you going to tell me that that having a very expensive wind turbine that might cost $5 or $6 million on some state land isn't going to have an impact on hunting? Do they want high-powered rifles maybe hitting their very expensive fiberglass blades? It's a reasonable question to ask.
And I'm certain that the lease contract agreements have recovery in them for errant bullets or strikes of damage, of this type or that. I'm sure that they're quite protected in terms of what happens. The payment in some way is going to be recovered. It's not going to be absorbed by the companies themselves that are in operation. I haven't seen one of these leases.
Yeah.
I just has this feel that the public's not being benefited greater than other stakeholders in the formula.
Well, and there are problems with wildlife. The Game and Fish Commission said that they can't get to their allocated numbers of mule deer and pronghorns in a number of these places where they want to site a wind plant. Now, I'll tell you something interesting. The people who are putting up wind towers would like to have a deep soil profile where that foundation goes in, and that is denoted in many places in Wyoming by sagebrush, and the pronghorns and the mule deer like the sagebrush too. So wind turbines are sited sort of preferentially in places that the wildlife would prefer to have grazing ground, especially when conditions are bad, because they will browse on sage preferentially when they can't get to the grass over deep snow. This is a potential problem. And some research that was done a while back, about 6 years ago, pointed out that if you look at how pronghorn in particular treat wind turbines, they avoid them. They avoid them even after they've been up and operating for a long time, and you don't have people wandering around the base like you do during construction. I think just the psychology of pronghorns, they are very vigilant about their surroundings. To have something constantly moving, perhaps producing weird noises, makes them move away from it, and you get less benefit from that grazing ground.
The more cautious any animal is, the longer life they generally live.
Well, pronghorns are so iconic to Wyoming. I love those animals, and I like mule deer to an extent. The pets we have around Laramie are a bit of a pest. They come through my backyard all the time, and they tore up one of the covers on my window wells.
They like those
Cost
floral
me.
blooms.
It cost me. Oh, you can't grow flowers. They eat those, but they're cute. They're cute as hell.
Right. Do you remember years ago, seas of antelope? As you would travel across the state of Wyoming, you would see herds, 300-400 head, just a move. You just see the land. It would just move. It would just be a sea of movement, and that was the travel. You might wait 10 minutes just on the roadways, scenic byways, if you will, of the state of Wyoming on the way to Riverton, Lander. You could very often find these herds and watch their travels, and that was a traffic jam in Wyoming.
Well, for about 14 years, in partnership with some of my family, I farmed and ranched in Goshen County, and I had a herd of pronghorns that was probably in the neighborhood of 200 animals that would not leave one of my alfalfa fields alone. I have no idea how much money I lost, but you know what? It's Wyoming, and you just tolerate it for the most part.
You make me think of the Wyoming legislature comes to session yesterday, today, day 2 of a 20-day budget session for the Wyoming legislature. I think about it in transition because as you talk about land and ownership and the wildlife management, corner crossings comes about, and it made positive gain to the floor in, I believe, the House of Representatives yesterday. But we'll monitor that. But are there legislative considerations that you're aware of that you might be watching this session, Dr. Kilty?
I focus a lot of my attention on energy, and particularly electrical energy. And I should look more carefully at the legislature. But I tried to get involved about a year ago in that failing attempt for the Make CO2 Great Again bill. I thought there were reasons for supporting that bill. And here's just one example. It ties in to energy quite a lot, as you know. If we're going to add carbon capture to coal plants, the coal plant is already built. We're not building any more coal plants. The Public Service Commission some years ago told me through their chairperson at the time that they would never allow the construction of a plant that released CO2 into the atmosphere in Wyoming. How about that? This is a broad prohibition, but that prohibition is basically built into Section 18 of Title 37. It says that by a date certain, which I think is in 2032, anybody who has a thermal plant that releases CO2 is expected to propose carbon capture or some other low carbon emission method, like using blending hydrogen into your natural gas. I mean, there's a number of ways
How
this
will it
could
be
be done.
diffused?
But this has two effects. Number one, you're spending extra money to build this facility to capture the carbon, and maybe you can't use it economically, so you're going to put it underground. You've now lost a quarter of the power output of that plant, and that means you have less commodity to sell. Between those two factors, you've now not quite doubled, but probably increased the rate for producing electricity from that plant by 80%. I think that putting Section 18 in the way they did, Section 18 of Title 37, was a mistake. And I was hoping that they would neuter it in some way, but it failed. Because this is interesting. I think there's a lot of people in Wyoming on both sides of the aisle. This isn't really political. There's a lot of people who think we're going to get wealthy from wind energy or solar energy or battery storage or making hydrogen in some way or storing carbon dioxide and sending it to petroleum.
Nuclear storage also in the conversation.
Nuclear storage is not a huge use of land area. And if we would just do some sensible things like reprocessing nuclear fuel in this country, and I've always thought Wyoming should be in good shape for being a reprocessing site for nuclear fuel, because we have people who already tolerate a lot of dangerous stuff. We got pipelines that carry hydrogen sulfide gas. That's really dangerous stuff. Maybe everybody's not aware of these dangers, but we have people who are tolerant of industrial operations that are required to maintain our life. And they're not, I view Wyoming people as being pretty sensible.
People of Laramie, Wyoming, you are right along I-80. And I-80 right over your aquifer.
Yeah.
The water that we all drink, and that is endangered by all that travel the highways every day.
So, I'm pretty in favor of nuclear energy, but as I've told you before, I think on this program, that the plant in Kemmer is going to be a test bed to see how well this sort of novel design works out, and so forth. So people shouldn't get too excited about it. But there's a nascent industry there that could help take over from natural resources extraction if we ever get to the point where we're bullied by everybody else.
Are there key legislators in our elected body that are of particular alert? They're key figures that alert you in their activity. Are there ones that you watch specifically? Everyone bears consideration. I don't mean to
Right.
say that
Right.
senators or House of Representative members are less involved than any other. But are there keys that you've found historically that are leaders in these topics?
There aren't a great number that I talk to all the time. I sure talk to Sherry Steinmetz and her staff occasionally. Kevin Campbell, who's I think from Converse County, Converse or Natrona, one of the two up there. I've spoken extensively with him.
Do you find that these elected representatives or elected representatives that are in these discussions of energy are landholders, therefore potentially influenced by the potential, be it Mark Gordon as governor with large land holdings in Wyoming, or Kurt Meyer or others in the state, be it Degenfelder, Racine, Gray, anyone? Do you find that pattern? If you follow the land, if you follow the money and holdings, do those provide insights as to the direction of Wyoming?
I would be willing to guess that the people who are the majority landowners in these lease operations are generally in favor of wind, because really for two reasons. One, a ton of them are absentee landowners. They live elsewhere. The biggest leasee for Rock Creek 1 and 2, which is operational now Northwest Laramie, he lives in the Denver area. The biggest leasee besides the state of Wyoming in rail tie lives in Phoenix. And this is true that a lot of the people who seek to benefit, they're not going to be faced with looking at those wind turbines or listening to them all the time. They're simply absentee landowners. The others are the state, and as you know, who owns the state lands? It's one of those. It's a commons, right? And it's very difficult to decide who really feels that they have a stake in the ownership of that land or its stewardship or what it looks like, and so I think there's a divide there. There's a lot of people who think they're going to get wealthy from other industrial sorts of operations. And what I found something interesting the other day. There's a big coal plant at Delta, Utah. It supplies power into Southern California. I actually worked on some of the studies for that coal plant 40 years ago when I was doing some consulting for the LA Department of Water and Power. They're the customers. They take that that power. That coal plant's now been shut down. It is being converted to natural gas, but Mitsubishi is delivering turbines to it that can operate on blended hydrogen. And they think that by 2045, there'll be 100% hydrogen turbines. Now, where's the hydrogen going to come from? You know, it's not something that you find naturally, or maybe you do. There's some test drilling now up in Idaho that almost nobody knows about, where their target is hydrogen gas beneath the surface. And I think it's crazy. I don't think they're going to find what they are hoping for. But there's somebody who's worked out a theoretical model of how you generate hydrogen in the subsurface, and they're going to test it. Fine, test it. But more than likely, how you're going to make this hydrogen is by curtailed solar and wind energy. You'll use it to make hydrogen. So now you're going to encourage more wind and solar to be built so that they can supply power to hydrogen. And then, after great cost, the wind turbines have maybe a 35% capacity factor year around. But you pay for 100%, right? That's the real problem here of utility of capital investment. Now they're going to take that and they're going to turn it into hydrogen, and your efficiency there might be 40%. So you now take 40% of 35%, and you're down to 14%. And then you're going to blend it and burn it in a power plant that's a thermal plant where your efficiency is limited to about 50%. You take these long chains of things, and your efficiency is very low, but you're going to have to spend a lot of money to do it. I don't know how this is all going to work out, but what I see is price pressures on electric service, and those will bleed into natural gas, as you know, as people want to depend more on natural gas. It will diffuse into all kinds of other commodities like copper and construction of transformers, and you know, they even want us to stop using natural gas to heat our homes and to put in heat pumps. I can tell you how heat pumps work because I got plenty of experience with those. And if there's air sourced heat pumps, they work like crap, really. They're not useful. So, I don't know, pressures everywhere, pushed by economics, personal economics, right? I can benefit from this, so I'm going to push it.
One of the arguments in the February 3rd meeting presented by legal counsel for the Pronghorn wind lease holders was clearly, look at our investment, look at our investment to date. Yet you don't hear that there was no expiration set on the developers of coal-fired plants at their origination date.
Yeah.
And they could become extinct, made extinct, forced out of business entirely. But the same argument not being made equally for all energy types, and that ultimately comes down to winners and losers being picked in our world, which the conversation of winners and losers is a conversation that I want to segue to. The Wyoming Business Council and the University of Wyoming budgets have been large parts of many discussions before leading up to the February 9th start of the 2026 legislature. Have you witnessed, or are you aware of business successes that have been born from Wyoming Business Council efforts or University of Wyoming endeavors, academically or educationally based?
You know, somebody asked me, in fact, the person who's the trade representative for wind and solar, we got into a discussion about this. And I don't know if you know this, but I got an undergraduate degree from Bozeman, Montana, from Montana State University. And I went to Laramie for a little while and then transferred to Bozeman. And Bozeman, Montana, and Laramie, Wyoming were really similar towns when I was there in the mid-19s. When I graduated in 1975 from Bozeman, it was a town that you left after you graduated because there really wasn't much for, career opportunities there. Montana State University is now twice as big as it was when I was there. It's got about 17,000 students. A physics professor that I worked with when I was in my senior year had come from Yale, and he was a quantum optics, photonics sort of guy, and real smart fella, a slow-talking Georgia boy. And he was really the seed that started the entire quantum optics photonics business that now employs probably in the neighborhood of 500 to 600 people in Bozeman. And there are 28 companies. They're little companies all over the place. And that generates a real vibrant economy in Bozeman, Montana, and it has drawn people. As you know, that place has been growing like gangbusters. Well, Laramie and Bozeman were similar at one time. So what has happened to Laramie? As you know, a lot of ventures are born here in Laramie from university people, but the difficulty is figuring out how to get them to stay here. And the difference between Montana State, if you've been to Bozeman, that's a real pretty setting in there. You're in between the Bridger Range and the Gallatin Range and so forth there. And the winters are a little harsh, but it's not windy like Laramie and so forth. And Laramie's environment kind of pushes people away. So when a San Francisco entity wants to buy one of our startups and move it to San Francisco, it's hard to stop it. In Bozeman, people resist it. They say, okay, you can buy this entity and you can take it to Boston.
Well, we're not leaving.
And we're not leaving, and we're just going to start another startup because we got lots of other ideas. Mm-hmm. And boy, I wish I could see that in Laramie, but it's a much weaker thing in Laramie, and it probably would take a lot of study to figure out entirely why it's so.
So creation, incubation, positives for Laramie, but direct
longevity
sustained successes are minimal.
Right. Well, as you know, a lot of people at the university really live in the Fort Collins area and commute because they prefer Fort Collins. I'll tell you an amusing story, and I don't think Michael Stollinger would mind, but he's Austrian, and he's in the mechanical engineering department. And Michael told me one time I was bemoaning the fact that we couldn't get faculty to stay in Laramie and stay put at the university. And Michael says, you've got to recruit people who like Laramie. And Michael likes cold weather and snow. You need to look for those people.
Well, they say the same in athletics. They say the same in so many different perspectives. The Wyoming Business Council, have you seen creation of strong energy companies in the endeavors, the workings supported by the Wyoming Business Council, which is essentially a state mechanism created in the state of Wyoming in order for government monies to go to private entities through a Wyoming Business Council filter, if you will?
I have not. In fact, my association with the Wyoming Business Council was sort of severed when my father passed away. And that was a long time ago. That was 30 years ago now. And so I haven't paid much attention to it since.
I was just curious because one of the obviously what happens to the University of Wyoming is of substantial interest to the Laramie community in our future as a large employer and foundation in the community. It's powerfully influential to what happens. And when you think about an entity that has $5.8 million in salary overhead annually in the Wyoming Business Council, that's a lot of potential state of Wyoming dollars that are dedicated to employees alone, and that's not direct investment that we're seeing an immediate return on. That goes to employees, which I guess the immediate return would be those are great jobs. Those are great Wyoming Business Council jobs in the state. In fact, some are paying better than local and state salaried employees directly hired by the state of Wyoming for operations of the state administration. But 11.6 million in 2 years, every 2 years for salaried positions. Executive Director Josh Durrell, 288,000 annual income. And the power companies, the energy execs, the CEOs, imagine how much those individuals are bringing in as compared to our median income in Laramie, Wyoming, some 40 or 50,000 per person.
Yeah.
That in any event, unless we ask so many times, unless we ask questions, unless we talk, we listen, we have little chance of learning more than we knew yesterday if we don't endeavor and invest today. So I do appreciate you coming to the talk shop and sharing your knowledge, your observations, and certainly for those that are in the audience that are not familiar with you, you are a retired engineering instructor at the University of Wyoming. Tell us about maybe something you prepared to talk about today, maybe as we close, that you want to mention before we do finish this segment.
You know, I don't think that I'd really thought much about anything else, and I had 12 years total at the University of Wyoming that were afforded to me by a weird set of circumstances. I was a trustee at LCCC, you know, for 4 years, and I got in there because I was extremely disappointed by how another government entity behaves in the state of Wyoming, and that was LCCC. And they had a president of the college who I thought he had poor leadership skills. He was resentful at times. He would.
Was the Albany County campus for LCCC born during that time, or was this before that?
Maybe
Dr.
a little
Kilty?
bit before that time, but oh my God, I got a Charlie horse in my leg. Owie. These chairs are too short for me. Owie, owie, owie.
We will break in a moment and be back. Dr. Kilty, rest that leg.
I have